Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, previewing the Nuggets Timberwolves second round playoff series by looking back at the regular season matchups between the two teams, going all the way back to the game in November, looking at the three games over March and April, how each team tried to exploit the other's weaknesses, and also who guarded who. What can we expect in this playoff matchup between the Wolves and Nuggets? It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Happy Thursday, everybody. We are just 2 days away from the start of the second round of the playoffs, at least for the Wolves. It's looking more likely the Wolves will be the late game on Saturday because pretty likely we're going to have at least one other, whether it's a game six or game seven happening Saturday elsewhere in the NBA. So we're almost there. Today, I want to focus in on the actual, after rewatching the regular season matchups between the Wolves and the Nuggets, I want to talk through what I found rewatching some of those games, anything we can pull from the regular season and apply to the postseason. And also why, if you just look at the box scores, a couple of those games are a little wonky, right? Who was playing, who wasn't, what guys were in the rotation back in November that just aren't in the rotation or on their respective teams now. There's so much to unpack here if you go back and rewatch these games. So I want to do that. We talked a lot of numbers yesterday. We'll kind of link that up today a bit. We'll do some predictions on Friday's show. So a lot to get to here. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. On Wednesday's show, I spent some time going through some of the various numbers over at Cleaning the Glass, specifically, like strengths, weaknesses, looking at the box scores from the regular season games, combined with what Cleaning the Glass tells us about the body of work for both teams. And basically the cliff notes of that, please go back and listen or watch if you didn't. But basically, the Timberwolves did not rebound the basketball well in the season series against Denver. And that's going to be a thing in this series, right? That's going to be something to pay attention to. However, there was one game where neither Rudy or Cat or Nas played in, right? There's some weird things in there. However, on the flip side, the Timberwolves did a great job in the turnover category. They actually won the turnover battle in every single game against the Nuggets and actually combined to have 20 less turnovers across 4 regular season games than Denver. And I mean, in the regular season, Denver actually did turn the ball over, did not turn the ball over at a clip near where the Timberwolves were, right? Like the Wolves were mid-20s in terms of league rank for turnover rate. Nuggets were top 10. They don't actually turn the ball over all that much, but they did against the Wolves this year. So there's some weird stuff in there. Part of my play on Wednesday was like, hey, try and play fast, speed the game up, get some open threes in transition, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. I do think that's a real thing that the Wolves could try and do and have some success doing. And in rewatching the regular season matchups, that only backed up that assertion I made on Wednesday's show. So I went back and watched the game back on November 1st. This was game 4 of the season for Minnesota. They were 1-2 at the time. They had just come off that second half collapse against Atlanta. Denver was, I believe, 4-0. They were undefeated coming into this game. And so, you look at that game and there's a lot that's different, right? And I think we can start there. Both teams were healthy, right? Because it's game 4/5 of the season for these teams. But like Shake Milton was a rotation player for this Wolves team, right? So Shake Milton played rotation minutes. He was the only one that played rotation minutes that's not on the team anymore. Troy Brown Jr. was just a garbage time guy in that game. For the Nuggets, I mean, they had like Zeke Naji played 18 minutes. He's not in the rotation right now. He spent part of the year hurt. He's out of the rotation. Julian Strawther played 16 minutes in that game, and both of those guys had moments where they really struggled, especially Strawther. And so these teams look different now. And I want to make sure that I point that out. That was one of the things that stood out to me is the Wolves really took advantage of some of these bench players that the Nuggets had. And by the way, the Nuggets didn't play their bench hardly at all in their first round series against Lakers. So this is kind of another side point here, is an area that I think the Wolves could have an advantage in, and perhaps we'll get back to this later. The Timberwolves have a much better bench. In grand scheme of things, it does matter less in the playoffs than it does in the regular season, right? Because these are individual games. You have at least 1 day rest between all these games, more time to recover in between. The stakes are higher, so you're going to play your guys more minutes. I get it. Everyone, guys that play 32 minutes in the regular season are going to play 35, 36, 37 minutes in the playoffs. That's how this works. But it still matters. You're still talking about 10, 12 minutes a game for guys that maybe aren't really good and shouldn't be in a playoff rotation, right? It's why guys get squeezed out of the rotation when it comes to playoff time. Like Monte Morris in the regular season was playing closer to 20 minutes a game, right? And in the playoffs, he's going to play. What did he play the other day when he wasn't in there? I guess he wasn't even really in the rotation in game 4 against Phoenix. But he was like a, 10-ish minute a game guy. That's what happens in the playoffs. But it still matters that those players are good. And one of the other points I want to get to, actually, we could talk about this now. Look back at last year's playoffs. The Timberwolves last season against Denver, like no Jaden McDaniels, no Naz Reid. That's well documented. And on its face, like if you're describing this to like a non Timberwolves follower, a non Timberwolves fan, and you're saying like, hey, I think the Wolves have a real shot against the Nuggets, and they're like, oh well, they beat them last year, and obviously the number one thing is healthy year of Cats, the team for the most part compared to last year. Ant's growth is obviously number one, but then the other thing you would say is, well, Naz and Jade didn't play last year. Two of their best 6 players did not play in the series. That's true, but you know what else that meant? That also means everybody else bumps up a rung on the ladder, right? So you had last year in the playoffs. Taurean Prince started a game. You had 4 games started by Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and you also had rotation minutes for Austin Rivers. He played 12 minutes a game in that series last year. Austin Rivers, like there were pros to Austin Rivers. He should not have been playing 12 minutes a game in a playoff series. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker, last year's version, probably wasn't ready to be playing 30 minutes. I know he was really good in the play-in against Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. I know that he's still a good defender, but like that role last year, he'd only been on the team for a couple months, or not even like 6 weeks. That wasn't the best. I guess it would have been about 2 months. That role wasn't the best role for Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So you're taking out your best perimeter defender in McDaniels. You're taking out your best offensive weapon off the bench in Naz Reid, and you're bumping everybody else a rung. And that was a big deal. And I make that point in part to look at the Nuggets bench this year. Look at the guys who are playing bench minutes for the Nuggets in the playoffs now. Like Najee's already out of the rotation. Strother's out of the rotation. Like Reggie Jackson's playing 10 minutes a game. That's fine. And the Nuggets have been able to get something out of Reggie Jackson. Like, he had a fine year, right? Like it's not ideal. And I would not want Reggie Jackson on the Timberwolves. You definitely don't want him playing 10 minutes a game in the playoffs. He's just not a playoff rotation player. Christian Braun is, but there's weaknesses there. The Wolves can exploit him, his defense. I think he may, like, you look at some of the metrics. The mileage traveled is really good, right? Like he plays hard. I get that. He's athletic. He had that massive dunk on Rudy last time out against Denver. So a decent player, but you can exploit Christian Braun when he plays 13 minutes a game in the playoffs. Peyton Watson had 1 billion blocks the last time the Wolves played them, and he's actually a really good defender. But is he ready at 21 years old or whatever he is to be playing? What did he play in the first round? 12 minutes a game. The Timberwolves bench is unequivocally better than Denver's. And that stood out to me going back and rewatching these games. The more recent ones, especially going back to November, because the situation now is better for Denver than it was marginally better than it was in November. But the Wolves' depth is going to matter. In the first round, the Nuggets played their bench less than any other team in the first round of the NBA playoffs. They just didn't play them. Like nobody averaged more than 13 minutes a game. Only 3 guys averaged more than 10 minutes a game off the bench. And only 4 guys actually played off the bench regular rotation minutes. DeAndre Jordan picked up 9 minutes in 1 game, but didn't play in the other 4. So this is and this is one of the things, like nationally, you'll hear people talk about a concern with the Nuggets is if they have an injury, right? If you have, even if it's not Jokic or Murray, if Porter Jr., Gordon, KCP, if one of those guys tweaks an ankle and misses a week and a half, like has a Grayson Allen-like injury, right? That's going to be a big problem for Denver. So depth, on a game-to-game basis, and then also insurance in case of injury, is an advantage for Minnesota. And that stuck out to me immediately when I was rewatching some of these games. I want to go back to a couple other things from game one, and then we'll take you through some of the more recent ones more quickly. But just kind of what could we expect from matchups and how these teams are going to try and take advantage of one another in this series. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA. It makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. I mean, if you're looking for playoff tickets, I know a lot of people are trying to go to Denver. That's a great place to look, would be Game Time. If you're trying to go to Denver and watch game one on Saturday or game two on Monday, that's the place to look. They have last-minute deals that you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. I'd use Game Time for anything beyond sports. I go to all of the above, right? Like I'll go to concerts with friends. I'll go to comedy shows. I'll go to theater shows with my wife. Like Game Time is the place to get those tickets. They also have flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And they have zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If you do, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so we talked about depth. We talked about the bench. That's something that really stuck out in the first game because the Timberwolves took Julian Strawther to the woodshed. They did. Like, he couldn't guard anybody in that game. Zeke Naji, Minnesota native, he struggled as well in moments in a couple of the games that they played earlier in the year. In game one back in November, the Timberwolves executed their game plan of trying to make Nikola Jokic shoot the basketball. They tried to show Jamal Murray's size, right? Their preference was to have Jaden McDaniels guarding Murray, and he did, and he did a really good job doing so. In that first game, let's see, I lost it here. In the first game, if I can grab the box score. Oh, no, there it is. In that first game, Murray shot just 5 of 16, and the majority of that was with Jaden McDaniels guarding him, showing him length, showing him size. Occasionally, Kyle Anderson was on him. That's obviously not ideal because of Murray's much more athletic and quicker than Kyle Anderson, but length is how you have to guard Jamal Murray, provided you can stay in front of him. But then also you've got the backline of Rudy Gobert, so as long as Rudy's on the floor, you could get away with having, now hopefully Rudy and Kyle Anderson aren't sharing the floor too often in the series, or at least in a situation where Slow-Mo would end up guarding Jamal Murray, but on a switch or whatever, I think Slow-Mo did an okay job at times in that game guarding Murray. But obviously, Jaden McDaniels was the best doing so. This game, the Timberwolves ended up winning 110-89. Again, this was game 5 of the year for the Nuggets, game 4 for Minnesota. They won by 21, held the Nuggets to 89 points. They actually should have won by more. They missed a lot of easy shots around the rim. The officiating was atrocious in this game. The Wolves ended up actually shooting 27 free throws and the Nuggets shot 10. But the officiating was really bad. Like, the Nuggets almost looked a step slow in this game, and it was weird. They were 4-0 to this point. But it was a pretty significant beatdown by Minnesota. They were up 19 at halftime, won the game, like I said, by 21. The role player stuff, Najee, Strawther, that stuck out. McDaniels guarding Murray. Also, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope cannot guard Anthony Edwards. He just can't. And we saw this later in the year as well. And Ant's overall numbers against the Nuggets were not great in the regular season. He was, over the 4 games, and averaged 26 points per game on 48, 23, and 82 splits. The 23% from 3 is obviously the thing that stands out. He didn't do a whole lot of other stuff well either. He didn't rebound a ton. The passing to turnover rate wasn't ideal. He averaged 4.5 assists to 2.5 turnovers. Now, I want to say that all those things have improved, and certainly if you look at the 4 games against the Suns, that's certainly the case. But a couple of these Nuggets games were just a few weeks ago, like less than a month ago, right? So part of that is the way that Denver defended him, but I also just think it was Ant having off nights. Like he shot 23% from 3 against them, but he still averaged 26 points per game. Go back and look what he did last year in the playoffs against Denver in his second taste of the playoffs following the Memphis series the year before. Ant averaged 32 points per game last year in the playoffs. And again, 48% from the field, 35% from 3, and 85% from the free throw line. Assists to turnover was a little bit better last year than it was in the regular season series. So he averaged 32 a game last year on 48, 35, 85 shooting splits in the playoffs. Ant can get to his spots against the Nuggets. And that is one of the things that stood out to me the most is, well, the numbers aren't super gaudy. And like, I don't know, national talking heads could look at this and be like, well, Ant, only shot 23% from 3, 26 points per game, almost 3 turnovers per game against Denver. Like, they can guard him. Well, who's going to guard him? I mean, it's going to have to be Aaron Gordon. And I think it was the 3rd game, which was, I don't know, a little less than a month ago. And game 3, by the way, was the weirdest one. That was, it seemed weird to me. The Wolves won that one. That was no Jamal Murray, no Karl-Anthony Towns. Jokic got off to a bad start. The Wolves built a big lead, and they ultimately ended up winning the game by 13 points, 111-98. That was March 29th, so just over a month ago. But I think it was that game, if I'm not mistaken, where Anthony Edwards, I just lost my train of thought, what I was saying related to that. I was so concerned about like which game it was. Where Ant was getting to his spots and just missing shots. Like that was the biggest thing. It wasn't like they had a plan to guard him, and it just stuck out to me like, oh, that's what it was. That Aaron Gordon, all of a sudden, like he could slow Ant down a little. Like he was at least forcing Ant to take tougher shots, right? To get into tougher mid-range attempts and get a better contest. But Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is just too small to guard Anthony Edwards. I know he's long. It just wasn't effective. Obviously, Jamal Murray can't guard him. He did frequently in the first couple of games. He didn't play, like I said, in game 3, and the Nuggets kind of got away from letting that happen in the final matchup. But early in the season when Jamal was switched on to Anthony Edwards, and it wasn't what they were trying to do it. The Wolves were seeking that matchup. Ant really had his way in that matchup. Aaron Gordon at least has a shot to slow down Anthony Edwards. He's a fantastic defender. He's really the only plus perimeter on-ball defender that the Nuggets have. I mean, I'm just not all that impressed with, like, Michael Porter Jr. has moments, but overall he was a minus defender this year. I mean, like who else? Like, look at Peyton Watson's a good interior defender. KCP's fine. He can't guard Ant though, right? Like you could put KCP on, I don't know, anyone else on the perimeter for the Wolves. You could put him on Jaden McDaniels. McDaniels' length might give him trouble, but he'd hold his own. I think Porter Jr. is more likely to guard Jaden McDaniels and try and be physical with him and bother him with his length. Because the number one goal is going to be put Gordon on Ant, I guess Porter Jr. is actually probably going to guard Cat. So we'll see a little bit of that as well. And then Jamal Murray, you're going to try and hide on Mike Conley as much as possible. But that's what the whole thing is, right? Each team is going to try and seek out the matchup they want. And it's one of the reasons why the Timberwolves, just Tim Connolly was like, I'm just going to get a team full of guys that we could just switch stuff if we want to, right? Like in an ideal world, you're getting through every screen, and the Wolves do a really good job with that. They got into a little bit of trouble in the regular season matchup, trying to fight through stuff when switching it might have made more sense. And allowing Jamal Murray just a little bit of daylight to hit a tough shot. We saw that in, I think it was game 2 that the Wolves lost to the Nuggets back in early mid-ish March. They just got a little like McDaniels will be guilty of this. Alexander Walker. Those are the two primary ones. Occasionally Mike Conley, where it's like, I'm going to get through the screen. I'm going to get over the screen. And you're so obsessed with doing that. And if it's a good enough screen or if it's a moving screen that's not called, Murray doesn't need much daylight. And he's an incredible shooter. He especially has been in the playoffs in his career. And so that worries me a little. I almost wonder if you go back to switching a ton, like what they did against Phoenix. Denver switches a ton for their part, and that's how you ended up with so much Murray on Ant, and the Wolves could take advantage of that. You will end up with Porter Jr. on, McDaniels or Cat. Now, the other thing is we only saw Cat play one game against Denver this year, right? It was that first game back in November. I want to talk a little bit about the Cat on Jokic thing and how the Wolves might guard Joker. So a couple more points on that, and then the rest of the regular season. We'll put a bow on the conversation today with some key takeaways overall, and that'll be the show here today. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new plane pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults, and more. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique minigames like digging for treasure or robot Panchico machine. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, so we talked a little bit about in the first game how the Wolves tried to make Jokic a scorer, and they did that a little bit in the second game as well. And the second game, to me, was the most impressive game for Minnesota. It was also an outlier because it was so weird, right? No Karl-Anthony Towns, no Rudy Gobert, no Reid. So the Timberwolves started Kyle Anderson at center, and Luka Garza was the backup center. That was it. TJ Warren played heavy rotation minutes. The Wolves were also on a back-to-back after playing in Utah the night before. That was the game with the Ant dunk over John Collins. Okay, so that was a weird game, massive rest advantage and travel advantage for Denver. They'd been waiting in Minnesota for the Wolves, and it came down to a last-second potential game-time three-pointer. Remember when KCP almost committed a foul and Ant just missed the three? I mean, this was a full-strength Nuggets team. Like Jokic played, Murray played. It was in Minnesota, of course, but again, rest and travel advantage to Denver. No bigs for Minnesota. And it came down to a buzzer beater. In that game, the Timberwolves put slow-mo on Nikola Jokic and just said, hey, like, have at it. See what happens. He picked up a couple quick fouls. They left him on the floor. He still ended up only committing 3 fouls for the game. And Garza played well enough. Garza had a really good third quarter. The Wolves were a plus 12 in the third quarter and came back in that game when they were down at halftime significantly. And a lot of that was Garza defensively. I don't think he was as good in the first half, but he settled in. Jokic ended up with 35 and 16. He only needed 22 shots to get his 35 points, 3 of 4 on threes. But the common thread here was game 1, Wolves Nuggets. He only had a couple assists. I think he might have had 3. Game 2, he only had 2 assists. And they won game 1. Game 2 is a close game, right? The Timberwolves are trying their best to make Nikola Jokic be a scorer. And I get that it's not a winning proposal. There isn't a winning proposal against the defending champions, right? You just have to hope. I talked about this a couple other times this week. You have to give something up, right? You have to hope you're giving up the thing that's going to hurt you the least, or maybe the other team is the worst at. And Nikola Jokic is good at basically everything. He's a good three-point shooter, right? I mean, what did he shoot for the season from outside the arc? He shot 36%. Like, he's a good three-point shooter. That's fine. It's decent. Better than decent. Right around league average. But you'd rather him shoot threes than have him facilitating out of the post or have him dropping hook shots on smaller players. In that game, the third game now, where the Timberwolves beat the Nuggets with no Murray, Jokic had 32, 10, and 5, but he turned it over 4 times, and he was 0 of 3 outside the arc. So game 1 against the Wolves, he had 3 assists. Game 2, he had 2 assists. Game 3, he only had 5. They were all either Wolves wins or a close game. Game 4 is the game where the Wolves had everybody except for Towns. It was otherwise a full-strength game for these teams. The Nuggets ran away late and ended up winning by 9, and Jokic went nuts. He had 41, 11, and 7 and only 2 turnovers. And the Wolves also didn't really slow down Murray effectively either. He had 20 points on 13 shots. So that was just bad all the way across. And not having Cat was huge in that game. The Wolves, the strategy to guard Jokic has to be Towns or slow-mo. And by the way, if you go back and look at Towns, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I think Jack Borman said it on the basketball party this week. Towns' numbers head-to-head against Jokic are actually very good. He's one of the best individual defenders to guard Jokic in the entire league by the numbers. And I think that has something to do with the officials allow more physicality. And there's something like Jokic doesn't actually get all that many calls. The Denver Nuggets don't shoot that many free throws. And it goes back to the physicality thing. It's the old, it's not Shaq, but it's like the Shaq thing, right? Jokic is so big, so skilled. Guys bounce off him. like he doesn't get as many foul calls as you'd think. So I think Towns is allowed to be a little more physical with Jokic. They're allowed to kind of push on each other, lean on each other. And Towns does a good job against him. He wasn't on the floor in the fourth matchup of the regular season. The Nuggets won by 9. Jokic had 41 on 20 shots. It is pretty much impossible to be more efficient than that. Plus 7 assists and only 2 turnovers in that game. So the Wolves actually did a great job on Jokic in the first 3 games. 1 close, 1 possession loss, 2 wins. And Cat was only present on the floor in the first game. So the Wolves are going to have Cat guard Jokic. I don't think they're going to bring doubles other than Rudy coming from free safety land where he's just simply guarding the rim and leaving Aaron Gordon to hang out in the corner. The Wolves played Aaron Gordon exactly how you'd expect them to in all 4 of these games. The Nuggets are way worse when he shoots the ball more. They just are. He is a 5th option in their offense by far. And if you could force him to be a factor offensively, then you're in a good spot. Now, he did have 9 assists in the last match. We actually led the Nuggets in assists the last time out against Minnesota. And I just like, it was just a poor performance for Minnesota. And also Denver's really good. Going back to my previous point, all you could do is hope to put them in a difficult position. And Jokic scoring 41 on 20 shots and having 7 assists is the worst possible combination, right? So if you could put Cat on Joker, somewhat stay out of foul trouble with slow-mo as the next man up to guard him. Reid did not do a good job guarding Jokic this year. And most guys don't. That's not a knock on Naz. I think the physicality Towns has, the comfort level of him playing in the post is an advantage. And then to have Rudy roaming the backline ready to block shots, that's huge as well. And I think that strategy with Rudy, quote unquote, guarding Aaron Gordon, but really playing free safety, essentially hanging out around the rim, cleansing every 2.9 seconds to not, get the defensive 3-second call, but providing support when Murray drives into the mid-range or, whatever. That is the winning strategy for Minnesota. You might give up a back cut here and there. There might be a couple cheap ones, but in the grand scheme of things, if you're making Joker try and put the ball on the floor to score, and you're making it at least challenging for him to do so, that's your best chance to win. Again, they don't have the depth. There are guys they've got a bunch of good shooters on this team. But what did I say? Jokic is 36%. Michael Porter Jr. was awesome in the first round of the playoffs. He's 40% from 3. Christian Brown's 38%. There really isn't anyone in the rotation other than Peyton Watson and Aaron Gordon that you're not going to want to close out to in a hurry. So it really is. It's like there's a lot of similarities between Denver and Minnesota. It's pick your poison. We're the second round of the playoffs. These teams are all good. And the Nuggets and Wolves are just happen to be 2 of the best 4 teams in the entire NBA, maybe 2 of the best 3 teams in the entire NBA. And they're facing the second round. So if you're the Wolves, you guard Jokic with Cat, you try and make him put the ball on the floor, try and make him be a scorer, bring a late double if you need to, or Rudy with backside help. Be physical with him as much as you can. Slow-mo's your next man up to guard Jokic. You don't put Rudy on Jokic. You just don't. He did that a little bit in the 3rd game, and it didn't go well. Jokic got off to a slow start, but one-on-one, Joker can score against Rudy. He's just so skilled. Rudy's impact is on everyone else on the floor, and also in a support role with Jokic. So, all that to say, I think McDaniels will guard Murray. And Cat will guard Jokic. And those are the most important roles. There isn't anybody else that you're super concerned about scoring off the dribble. Those are the 2. Everybody else is a spot-up shooter, essentially, for this team. And if you're making them put the ball on the floor to create, whether it's Gordon or KCP or Christian Brown or Reggie Jackson, that's fine. You want to make those guys do stuff. On the other side of the ball, KCP's a plus defender. Justin Holiday's a plus defender. He plays 7 minutes a game in the playoffs so far. But they don't have enough plus defenders. And KCP, like I said, was not good against Ant in the regular season. So the Nuggets are just a really good team defense. But there aren't individual defenders that should be able to slow down Ant. It's one of the reasons I'm really optimistic about this series. The Wolves match up with the Nuggets so extremely well. And by that, I mean better than really any other team in the league. The Nuggets are still incredible. They're still the defending champs. This is going to be the furthest thing for a walk in the park. I'm not saying the Wolves are like a matchup nightmare for the Nuggets. It's just that they match up better against them than virtually and possibly literally any other team in the entire NBA. And that means we're going to get a 6 or 7 game series. I'll make a full prediction with some bold predictions as well on Friday, on Friday's show, but this is going to be a 6 or 7 game series. It is. And the Wolves have a real chance in this one. So let's close it out with kind of like, we'll put a bow on it, as I like to say. Cat guarding Jokic, McDaniels on Jamal Murray with Nickeil Alexander-Walker as the next man up there. I think Ant roaming a little, playing free safety, being physical with the Reggie Jacksons and KCPs of the world is totally fine. Rudy guarding Aaron Gordon and roaming a little bit is exactly what you want. I go back to what I said. There were a couple examples in this regular season series of the Wolves pushing in transition and getting open corner threes. We talked on Wednesday. The Nuggets don't give up a ton of corner threes, but they wheel in transition. And you can run on Denver. I think that's a way Minnesota can, and it's going to be hard to run at altitude, right? That's the reason they're traveling Thursday, to try and get used to it as much as possible before Saturday. They got to run. They got to run. And it'll be easier to do it Saturday after 6 days off than on Sunday after 1 day off, right? So the Wolves have to get out in transition, run, look for open threes. They have to be physical with Jokic. And, just those are like, it may seem a little bit surface level, but those, like a good team against a good team, you have to pick out very specific things that you could do. And those are, outside of the stuff we talked about Wednesday related to offensive rebounding and turnovers and all that stuff, that's all going to be important too. But these teams, neither one of them has a massive glaring weakness. They're both good at really everything. And that's why I'm kind of picking these narrow categories where I think the Wolves could have some success, because the success will be in the margins when it comes to the playoffs. All right. Friday, I'll make some predictions. I'll make a couple of bold predictions as we did 2 weeks ago leading into the Suns series. Really looking forward to this on Saturday. So one more show this week on Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. A reminder that the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.